Hi, fifth grade. For writing workshop, at this point in that process, you are ready to start writing poem number 5. I'm not going to include a video in this assignment for every single step of the writing process, but I do want to take a minute and talk to you about the writing process and what I'm looking for in your writing, because I'm not seeing a huge change in the poems that are being turned in from draft 1 on. So draft 1 looks good, pre-writing looks good, but after that it looks like students are just going in and copying and pasting and then moving on to the next step. So I wanted to talk to you primarily about revision in this video. Revision is probably where we should see the most changes in your writing. So that's going to be on draft 2. So you pre-write, you gather those details, and then you draft, you create draft 1, and that's your first try at getting your ideas for your poem on the page. You guys are doing a great job with that. You're choosing topics that matter to you. You're doing a great job of mapping out details that you think that a good reader needs to have, and you're including those in your poem. Some of you have even been playing around with creating forms like 4 stanza poems with 3 lines in each stanza, because that's how it relates to your web. So I have no complaints there. I think you guys are doing a good job. You're showing good progress there. Where I see that we need to spend more time, take more time, and put more thought is during revision. And that happens in draft 2. So you go in and you create, or you copy draft 1 and you paste it into draft 2. But after that, you should be using your ELA reference folder to remind yourself of those mini lessons that I've taught to you along the way. It actually can be found in your ELA reference folder starting on page 18. So poems 1 through 3, maybe even poem 4, it's okay if they're still a little rough and I'm not seeing huge changes. But from this point on, poems 5 and 6, I should see that you are rolling up your sleeves and you are going in and you are really working to make sure that the mini lessons that I taught in class are being applied in your poem. Your grade depends on it. I'm not looking for perfection. What I'm looking for is growth. And I've told you guys before, sometimes we have to be bad at things for a little while before we get good at them. So this is what I'm asking you to do. This is the part where I want to see you getting good at these things. So on page 18 of your ELA reference folder, you have a definition of free verse poetry, okay? You guys are doing a good job with writing your poem and making sure it's in lines and stanzas and making sure that it does the good work, or does sound like the poems that we've been reading in class. But what I want you to do after that, after you get your draft 1 done, I want you to go to the second piece of notes on page 18, and that's remember the power of I. You and I both know that if we want our readers to experience what we're describing, we have to give them someone to be with, and we have to give them sensory details so they can experience what we're experiencing. So taking a look at the notes we put in that ELA reference folder for the power of I is going to help you do that. So you read over those notes. It's just like really just like 3 or 4 sentences. And then you go back into your poem and you look and see if you have applied that in your poem. Then you have notes at the end, or at the bottom of page 18, about beware the participle. I want you to read over those notes and then go back into your poem and make sure that you don't have too many words that end in ing or ed that are going to take away the power of I. Then you're going to turn the page and you're going to look at the top of page 19 where it talks about leads. Ask yourself, does my lead begin inside the experience, or do I clear my throat for a few stanzas or a few lines? For example, if you were writing a poem about deer hunting, did you give us so much background information? Did you tell us what time you woke up, what you had for breakfast, how you brushed your teeth, how you got to the stand? Or did you start inside the experience when you're sitting in your deer stand and that massive buck comes out into the clearing and your heart starts beating and your body's shaky and you can't hardly get the safety turned off on your gun because it's just you're so overwhelmed by the size of the rack on this buck. That is starting inside the experience. Of course, that's just an example. So if you weren't writing about deer hunting, it's not going to apply to your poem, but I think you get the point. You don't need to tell me everything that happened. You need to start inside the experience because that's where the interesting part is. Then you'll look at the notes you have for breaking lines and stanzas on page 19. You guys are doing fairly well with this. The main thing I would ask you to pay attention to is your punctuation. Are you doing it consistently throughout the poem? So if you choose to use it, fine. If you choose not to use it, that's fine too. Whatever you choose, just make sure you're being consistent with it throughout the poem. And then we have the rule of so what at the bottom of page 19. This is alluding to the theme of your poem. Your reader should be able to tell why this experience or the topic that you're writing about is significant to you. If they can't figure that out, it's probably because you haven't figured it out. For example, I wrote a poem about my parents' divorce. When I wrote that poem, it was just basically a description of that event in my life. Okay? So I walked away from it for 2 years. And when I came back to it, I was able to write more, and you could tell why I had chosen to write that poem. And the reason you could tell that is because that poem helped me come to an understanding of something that I was feeling. So there was a lot of hurt and turmoil during that time in my life. My world got kind of turned upside down when my parents got a divorce. But through time and communication, healing and some inner peace happened as a result of that experience. So when you would read my poem about my parents' divorce, you would see that by writing about this experience, I was able to name my feelings and come to some kind of resolution with it. So think about your so what as being your theme. It's the lesson or the message that you want readers to be able to take away from your poem, from reading it, and be able to apply to their own lives. Then we flip the page to page 20, and we have notes about our mini lesson on concluding strongly. When you get to this part, you need to make sure that your conclusion has impact and that your poem just doesn't suddenly stop. This is the last thing your reader is going to encounter in your poem. And so this is a good place to put that so what or that main idea. There's a reason why a lot of great poets use echo structure in their introduction or their lead and in their conclusion. So it repeats kind of what you said in your introduction or your lead in your conclusion because it's reinforcing the main points or the so what or theme. Okay. Then you have a very quick snippet in the middle of page 20, which is cut to the bone. And this one's kind of pretty self-explanatory. After you have checked your poem for all of those other things, you need to look and see if there's stuff that doesn't need to be there. So you cut your poem so that it only contains powerful words that a good reader needs, and you take out the stuff that a good reader doesn't need. Use repetition is the very last set of notes found on page 20. It's at the bottom. And this is a technique that good writers and poets use often, and they have great effect. You need to be playing around with this concept. If you haven't played around with using repetition in your writing or effective repetition, then it's time to start because it's a technique that we know is effective. It creates rhythm, and we know that poems aren't just meant to be read silently. They're meant to be read out loud because it's not just about the meaning, it's about the sound of things as well. And then that brings us to the last bit of notes that I want you to look at when you're deciding on what revisions need to be made in your poem, and that's page 21, figurative language. As a writer, you know that some of the most vivid images that writers give you to latch onto and to understand what they're describing have figurative language in them. So they use figurative language to create that vivid image. This is something that is easy to identify but hard to do in your own writing. That being said, I still want you to take it on. I still want you to try and use figurative language in your writing because you're not going to get better at it until you have a chance to play around with it and experiment with it. So you can't have the attitude, that's just too hard for me right now. You have to keep trying. My advice to you is to try personification first because to think metaphorically is hard work. And a lot of times we can take qualities of a person and give it to something that is not a person more easily than we can use metaphor or simile as we are using figurative language. Okay, so hopefully this helps. Also, I am seeing misspelled words in published and polished copies. I'm seeing the personal pronoun I not being capitalized. Those two things are on your editing checklist. What I'm seeing kids do is just go in and put X's next to that checklist, and then they're just copying their revised poem and pasting it in, and then they're pasting it in again in their polished copy. I need to see a change from draft one all the way to your polished and published copy. I should see subtle differences in each one. I should see tons and tons of differences between draft one and draft two because draft two is where the step of a revision takes place. I should see those spelling errors and those capitalization errors being fixed in draft three where you're editing. So you don't have to watch a video on each step of the writing process before you do each step of the writing process. You do have to try and apply those things that I just talked to you about. Your grade depends on it, guys. Send me a message or let me know if you're struggling with this, and I will do my very best to set up a meet or to be able to get you answers and get back to you so that we can continue to function as we would if we were here at school. I love and miss you guys. Please make sure you're doing your best work, even if your classroom is your home. Love you, and I can't wait to see you. I think I said that again, but really, who can hear that too many times? Bye, guys.